Have you ever stopped to think how many times your peace was hijacked by someone who didn't even deserve to be in your life? Why do we insist on talking to those who don't listen, on explaining the obvious to people who live in denial? And here's the most uncomfortable question. Could it be that, at some point, we were also the idiot in someone else's story?
Arthur Schopenhauer once said that stupidity is a capital sin of human nature, and like every sin, it demands a price, but not from the one who commits it, rather from those who insist on living with it. All of us at some point have stumbled upon the words of someone who talks too much and listens too little. We've all carried on our shoulders the weight of an empty conversation, an unfair criticism, a calculated provocation. The problem isn't the existence of idiots. They've always existed and always will. The real problem is how wide we open the doors of our mind to let them in. This video isn't about teaching you to hate anyone. It goes deeper than that. It's about learning to build a silent fortress, a kind of emotional intelligence that doesn't shout but imposes, a consciousness that doesn't seek revenge but withdraws, a peace that isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of boundaries. Get ready for a journey between irony and lucidity. We're going to revisit encounters you've probably already lived, identify patterns that silently drain you, and above all, look inward. Because yes, sometimes the idiot lives where we least expect, within ourselves. They don't arrive announcing their presence. They don't wear uniforms or hang a sign around their neck saying, "Danger, peace drainer." Quite the opposite. They often show up with a smile, a ready-made opinion, and a false sense of familiarity. Sometimes they're co-workers, sometimes old friends. And in more cruel cases, they're the ones we call family. The problem was never the existence of idiots. The problem is that when we're not paying attention, they sit at our table, sleep in our emotional living room, and convince us that their voices should shape our choices. You know that friend who always makes you doubt yourself? Or that colleague who turns every conversation into a competition? Or that person who subtly makes you feel small every time you dare to be yourself? They don't kick down the door. They ask for a glass of water. And before you know it, they're rummaging through the fridge of your sanity. There's an old metaphor that says living with limited people is like breathing smoke. At first you think you're fine, but over time your emotional lungs start to burn. And worse, you get used to it. You start thinking it's normal to live in that fog. Normal to be mistreated with sarcasm disguised as humor. Normal to explain your feelings 100 times. Normal to walk on eggshells just to avoid triggering the ego of someone who never learned to look within. Philosophy warns us, most human suffering doesn't come from great disasters, but from the daily repetition of small emotional violences. Michel de Montaigne, in his essays, said that habit is the greatest tyrant of humanity, and getting used to living among idiots is, little by little, giving up your own clarity. Idiots aren't just loud and they're contagious. They infiltrate not only your schedule, but your vocabulary, your mood, your way of thinking. You enter a discussion just to justify yourself, and before you realize it, you're competing with someone who doesn't even know what they're talking about. You try to fix the relationship, to offer one more chance, one more argument, and end up drained, empty, guilty for something that isn't even yours. That's where many people lose themselves. They think keeping these people around is an act of empathy, but it's not. Empathy without discernment becomes self-abandonment, and perhaps this is the greatest trick of stupidity. It disguises itself as normality. It hides behind jokes. It gets drunk on certainty. It protects itself with the shield of noisy ignorance. It makes it seem like you are the problem, for being too sensitive, for thinking too much, for caring too deeply. But you're not. You begin to notice the invasion when you find yourself having to justify your own calm, when you feel the need to explain your silence to those who only value noise, when your authenticity starts to bother people who only know how to live on the surface. Idiots infiltrate with phrases that sound harmless. You think too much. It was just a joke. You can't take anything. You're too sensitive. And so, slowly, they start reprogramming what you believe about yourself. But here's the antidote. Attention. Not the superficial kind, but an almost spiritual awareness. The kind that makes you notice how you feel after every conversation. The kind that forces you to look in the mirror and ask, am I closer to myself or further away? There's a silent wisdom in those who choose carefully with whom they share their energy. And if you still think it's arrogance to protect yourself, consider this. Even the most generous trees know when it's time to draw back their sap. So start observing, not what others say about you, but how you feel after hearing them. Notice who lifts you up and who drags you down, who silences you and who listens, who cheers for you and who grimaces when you shine. Idiocy, when repeated in subtle doses, may seem harmless, but over time it steals the most precious thing you have, your clarity. And when we lose clarity, we start believing that living like this is normal, but it isn't. It never was. Imagine a cup of freshly brewed, steaming coffee. You hold it carefully, savoring the aroma that awakens you. Now imagine someone distracted bumping into your arm, the coffee spills, and you, even without fault, are the one who gets burned. That's the silent dynamic between you and the idiots around you. You hold your lucidity carefully, but they keep bumping into it, with rudeness, accusations, indifference. And in the end, the one who gets burned is you. Emotional stupidity, unlike innocent ignorance, is active. It doesn't merely lack knowledge, it distorts it. It refuses to learn. It prefers being right over being clear. And worst of all, it demands that you fix the chaos it created. Aristotle once said, "To tolerate the intolerable is a form of injustice to oneself." And what we've been doing over and over is becoming caretakers of other people's immaturity. We turn other people's imbalance into our personal responsibility. We blame ourselves for explosions that aren't ours. We try to understand those who have no desire to be understood. We offer dialogue to those who only want a stage. And in that process, we get sick. You start your day well, grounded, centered, but after a single encounter, everything changes. Your mind keeps spinning around that cutting remark, that passive-aggressive jab, that venomous irony. You replay the conversation 10, 20 times in your head, as if trying to pinpoint the exact moment you went wrong, but often you didn't. You just fell into the trap of someone who uses confusion as a strategy. That's how the contagion spreads slowly, like water dripping on a roof through the night. You only notice the damage once the structure begins to collapse. And when it collapses, comes the guilt. Guilt for exploding, for saying what you didn't mean, for becoming someone you no longer recognize. Then, in a desperate gesture, you try to redeem yourself. You apologize for being exhausted. You try to maintain peace with those who never contributed to it. You carry the world on your back as if everyone else's emotional well-being were your personal cross. But what about your well-being? Who takes care of you when you're taking care of everyone else? Living among idiots is a process of erosion, not an earthquake and a slow, continuous wearing down. They don't knock you down with a single blow. They wear you out through exhaustion. They gradually convince you that you're the problem. And perhaps the cruelest part is this. When you start adapting, you speak less to avoid conflict. You walk on eggshells to not cause trouble. You suppress ideas to not seem arrogant. But here's the irony. The idiot, on the other hand, keeps saying whatever he wants, interrupts you, belittles you, provokes you, and in the end, still claims to be the victim. That's when the contagion reveals its most perverse form, when you begin to act like them. Reactive, defensive, suspicious, intolerant. You stop being you. And the world loses a bit of its clarity, its tenderness, its intelligence. It loses because you chose to survive instead of live. You chose to mold yourself to your surroundings instead of protecting your essence. But there is a way out. And it begins with a quiet, almost invisible gesture, a boundary, saying no, saying not today, saying I won't let myself be contaminated anymore. It may look like selfishness, but it's survival. It may seem cold, but it's maturity. It may look like indifference, but it's respect, for the little sanity you still have left. Remember, you're not here to carry the burden of someone else's ignorance. You're here to learn, to grow, to illuminate, and light doesn't need to justify itself to those who choose to live in the dark. Wisdom doesn't shout, it whispers, and those too distracted by the noise of fools never hear it. There comes a time when you finally understand. It's no longer about defeating the idiot, it's about not being swallowed by him. Because arguing with someone who doesn't think is like playing chess with a chicken. It knocks over the pieces, defecates on the board, and then cackles as if it had won. The question is no longer how to change the other, but how not to lose yourself. And that's where the 5 laws of self-protection come in. Not as rigid rules, but as principles of emotional survival. A practical philosophy carved from the pain of those who've wasted too much time trying to enlighten people who insist on living in the dark. Never argue with an idiot. He'll drag you down into his world and beat you with experience. The philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to us that hurts, but how we react to what happens. When you argue with an idiot, you abandon your center. You try to use logic where there is only vanity. You try to clarify where there is only an inflated ego. Idiots aren't looking for dialogue, they're looking for an audience. They feed on your outrage. They want your scandal, your sharp reply, your attempt to prove something. But when you stay silent, when you smile serenely and walk away, something magical happens. They wither. Remember, ignoring is also an answer, and often it's the most powerful one. Protect your energy as if it were gold, because it is. Imagine your attention as a phone battery. Would you waste it on useless apps knowing you'll need it for something important later? Of course not, but that's exactly what we do when we give our attention to the unbearable. There are people who light up a room with their presence, and others who darken everything the moment they open their mouths. Ask yourself, does this person energize me or drain me, inspire me or pull me down, awaken me or dull my mind? You have the right and the duty to refuse conversations that kill your soul. It's not arrogance, it's mental hygiene. Recognize the signs before it's too late. Idiots always give clues and learn to spot them. They talk too much and listen too little. They're never wrong, and it's always someone else's fault. They thrive on drama, never on solutions. They confuse confidence with arrogance, opinion with absolute truth. The danger isn't just in what they do, it's in what you ignore. Don't try to re-educate those who've chosen to live in chaos. Don't insist on seeing depth where there's only surface. People show you who they are. We're the ones who insist on closing our eyes. Don't take the bait. Provocation is the idiot's nourishment. You know that comment that sounds innocent but drips with venom? That joke that wounds disguised as humor? That question that exists only to irritate you? It's bait. The idiot doesn't want information. He wants a reaction. He wants to see your mask of composure fall. He wants to steal your control, your tone, your aura. And what do? You don't react, you choose. Silence, breath, distance. Remember, whoever masters their reaction commands their peace. Cultivate a shield of self-respect. No one treats you worse than you allow. Here's the most uncomfortable truth. You teach others how to treat you. If you accept too little, they'll give you less. If you forgive everything, they'll repeat everything. If you always adapt, they'll never change. Self-protection begins with respect. Not the kind demanded through shouting, but the kind imposed through silence. The kind of respect revealed when you look someone in the eye and say firmly, "Not with me," because what you tolerate defines what you attract, and what you attract shapes the world you live in. Nietzsche said, "He who fights with monsters must take care not to become one, and those who live among idiots must be twice as careful." The laws of self-protection aren't about isolation, they're about lucidity. They're the art of choosing your battles, and sometimes not fighting at all, the courage to build invisible walls with the elegance of someone who knows their own worth. And if someone calls that coldness, let them. Coldness is living beside those who dim your light, and calling it love, friendship, or coexistence. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment. And what if the idiot in the story was you? It's harsh, I know, but there's a vast freedom hidden within that question, because only those who dare to question their own sanity are truly walking toward wisdom. The truth is, we've all been on the other side. We've all been intrusive, stubborn, arrogant without realizing it. We've all interrupted someone because we thought we knew better. We've all ignored precious advice because our ego shouted louder than humility. Yes, all of us, including me, including you. And maybe that's the greatest risk in talking about idiots, falling into the temptation of believing the problem is always out there. But idiocy, that dense, numbing energy, isn't a fixed label. It's a state, a moment, a deviation of consciousness, and no one is immune. Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters must take care not to become one." And sometimes, in protecting ourselves too much from fools, we become exactly what we feared most: hard, inflexible, reactive, unable to listen. Because self-protection without self-criticism turns into disguised pride. It becomes a wall. It becomes isolation. It becomes a trench where no one enters, not the idiot, not love. There comes a point when the armor weighs more than it protects. And if you don't know when to take it off, you risk becoming the villain of your own story. Idiocy isn't only in those who shout, it's also in those who stay silent out of vanity. It's in those who pretend to know everything, but can't hear a maybe. It's in those who demand respect, but don't respect other people's time. It's in those who get offended by everything, mistaking opinions for attacks. Have you ever stopped to think how many times someone tried to warn you, and you ignored it? How many times life gave you signs, but out of pride you kept going, as if you already knew it all? Stupidity, when it takes root, isolates us. It makes us believe we're always right, always aware, always awakened. But that absolute certainty is, in itself, a symptom of blindness. Wisdom, on the other hand, is made of doubts, of pauses, of constructive silences, of whispered apologies in the middle of the night, when we finally understand the damage we caused to someone. Maybe you were the idiot in that WhatsApp group, in that meeting where you talked more than you listened, in that relationship where you demanded everything and offered little, in that friendship where you only showed up when you needed something. It hurts to see that, but it also frees you, because recognizing where you failed is the first step toward not repeating it. It's the beginning of your return to consciousness. And more than that, it's the clearest sign that you're awake, not just reacting on autopilot. You start to heal when you trade the need to be right for the willingness to evolve. When you realize that intelligence isn't about collecting answers, but about the depth of the questions you ask yourself. When you understand that wisdom isn't superiority, it's service, it's listening, it's presence. Idiocy is a distraction. Wisdom is a calling, and that calling sometimes arrives in the awkward silence after an argument when you realize you went too far. It comes in the closed-off expression of someone who used to smile when they saw you. It comes in absence, in that distance you didn't understand at first, but now begin to see clearly. And then you return. Return to yourself. Return to the other. Return to the question, where did I lose myself? And in that return, you find something precious, humanity. Because in the end, no one is just an idiot. No one is just wise. We are all a bit of everything, in constant transition. The difference lies in those who dare to see themselves, and those who keep pointing fingers, even while standing before a mirror. So when someone says you were too harsh, or that you spoke without thinking, or that you didn't listen with your heart, stop, don't react, don't try to defend yourself. Ask yourself, could they be right? And if they are, embrace the discomfort. Learn. Begin again. The idiot who recognizes his own idiocy is already one step away from lucidity, but the wise one who believes himself immune, that's the one who's truly lost. In the end, protecting yourself from idiots isn't an act of war. It's an act of love. Love for yourself, for your lucidity, for your silence. You're not here to fix everyone, nor to teach those who don't want to learn, nor to repeat the same conversation 1,000 times with those who never really listened. Life is already too complex to be shared with those who only bring confusion. The soul already carries too many questions to be dragged down by the hollow certainties of others. And you, my friend, you've been through too much to keep giving the stage to those who only want noise. But at the same time, the journey isn't about exclusion. It's about discernment. It's not about building walls. It's about defining doors. Who gets in? Who stays? Who deserves a place on the stage of your consciousness? And most importantly, who are you being when you think you're only defending yourself? Yes, there are idiots everywhere, but sometimes idiocy is just a disguise for unhealed pain, for an unloved ego, for a mistreated fear. The real question isn't, how do I eliminate idiots from the world? It's, how do I make sure they don't turn me into what I most despise? And the answer lies in awareness, in the pause, in the gaze that examines itself before it judges. Because peace isn't won through shouting. It's built in the silence of those who've learned to choose where to be, with whom to be, and most importantly, who to be. I didn't write this script by accident. In fact, it was born after an especially difficult week. One of those weeks when you realize that most of your exhaustion doesn't come from what you did, but from who you were with. It was after one of those toxic conversations, the kind that leaves you feeling smaller, drained, almost infantilized, that I sat in the dark, in silence, and thought, why am I still allowing this? Why do I keep giving so much of my energy to people who don't know its worth? Maybe you felt that too, that kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul, that need for peace that can't be found in the world, but in an internal decision, to stop accepting less than you deserve. So if this video touched you, know that it came from a real place, from a human being trying to learn, like you, how to live with more presence and less noise. And now, let's talk about you who made it this far, who listened to me in this midnight whisper, as if talking to an old friend on an imaginary porch. You are rare, not just because you sought wisdom amid the chaos, but because you stayed. You stayed until the end. And for that, I'll ask you for 3 things. Simple but powerful. Like this video as if you were killing that annoying mosquito buzzing around at 3 a.m. Seriously. The one that won't let you sleep. You know exactly which one. Comment below what part of the video hit you the hardest. Which idiot did you need to leave behind or recognize within yourself? And of course, subscribe to the channel, because here we're not just building content. We're building a safe place to reflect, to question, and, every now and then, to laugh at our own existential tragedy. And before you go, take a look at the videos popping up on your screen right now. One of them is going to stir something inside you that you're not quite ready to understand yet. But it will, and when it does, come back here. The porch will be waiting for you.